I predict that in a century from now, when people look back and go, who were the most important evolutionary theorists since Darwin? Of the top half dozen or so, our speaker will be on that list, Robert Trivers. I won't tell you who else I think might be on the list in case he disagrees with me. But Bob is well known for his important work in the 70s and 80s, working out the mathematics of cooperation, why any organisms would ever cooperate with one another. In a large model involved with inclusive fitness and kin selection, and then he later worked out why even non-genetically related organisms would cooperate with each other through something called reciprocal altruism. So these are phrases and terms used in biology now just commonly. They come from this man. His new book then expands that theory to include self-deception, not only deception, how organisms deceive one another, but how we deceive ourselves. You may have noticed a lot of politicians do this, but it turns out that we all do. And so I'll just read to you, Robert's a professor of anthropology and biological sciences at Rutgers. He's the winner of the Crawford Prize, by the way. This is sort of the Nobel Prize of biology. Richard Dawkins writes, "This is a remarkable book by a uniquely brilliant scientist. Robert Trivers has a track record of producing highly original ideas which have gone on to stimulate much research. His Darwinian theory of self-deception is arguably his most provocative and interesting idea so far. The book is enlivened by Trivers' candid personal style and is a pleasure to read. Strongly recommended. Another good Newtonmas gift. It's called The Folly of Fools, The Logic of Deceit and Self-Deception in Human Life." Please help me welcome Dr. Robert Trivers.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Michael, and more especially the invitation. This is the largest crowd I've talked to. Well, not quite. There was a large one at LSE, but so I know you're here to see Michael and not me. And looking at those skeptic magazines, I got to join because a lot of it's about deceit and self-deception in this or that form. So anyway, let me get to the point. I want to talk about deceit and self-deception today, and the idea I've had since the 70s to try to explain why on earth we would do something as counterintuitive as deceive ourselves is that we fool ourselves the better to fool others. And that's the idea I'll be pushing, and that's the major idea I've used to try to construct a science of the subject. So I've written a book where the science is segregated, by page, by notes tied to page numbers, but there are 500 references in there, and virtually everything I assert, certainly everything with a scientific basis, has got a citation into it. Now, deceiving others is no problem at all for evolutionary theory, never has been. Well, never is a long time, hasn't been for some time, and it's found all over the place. Viruses and bacteria will imitate parts of our body to gain entry. HIV continually changes its coat patterns in such a way that it's very difficult to mount an effective immune response to a newly appearing form or get a vaccine and so forth and so on. All levels of life. Predators hide from prey and vice versa, or they imitate things that are noxious. Within species, we now have just a whole armload of examples of deception in every kind of context. So let me give you an obvious one where the payoffs are directly in terms of reproductive success, which is ultimately the currency of evolutionary logic. Better put, genetic success, which includes not only your own reproductive success, but effects on relatives devalued by the appropriate degree of relatedness. Take just a man and a woman, take a couple, He can say, Maria, you're the only one and only for me, and I wouldn't dream of another woman. And meanwhile, he's got a child. Well, he's got a child living right in the home that's his, but he ain't telling Maria that. So deception can gain you an advantage when undetected. Likewise, this imaginary person, Maria, could always present a child to her husband and say, that's your child, but it's not actually his child. And she can thereby get the genes from one source and the parental investment from another and maximize her own self-interest by getting better genes. We know that's very widespread in birds. There's a very exciting discovery in the 80s that in many, many passerine species, 20 to 40% of the offspring ain't the offspring of the male who acts as if he thinks they are, okay? And we know from very good data that where we have the data, the female is choosing genes that are putatively superior to her mates, all right? There's a nice Senegalese folk expression that captures this problem from the male standpoint, and it says, better to have an ugly child that looks like you than a good-looking child that looks like your neighbor. Okay? But why on earth would we lie to ourselves? That's kind of like stealing from yourself. So you take $5 out of this pocket and you put it in this pocket. If you're deceiving yourself, you're both victimizer and victim. So where's the payoff in that kind of operation? It's been a classic problem in human thought ever since people started writing down things. It's found in religions. It's found, let's say, in the teachings of Jesus. Judge not that ye be not judged, for with a judgment ye pronounce shall ye be judged. Why do you see the mote in your neighbor's eye but fail to see the beam in your own eye? Thou hypocrite, first remove the beam from your own eye, the better to see the mote in your neighbor's eye. That's all about denial, projection, self-deception, and Jesus ain't for it. Okay? Now, philosophers have muddied up the issue by claiming that it's a logical contradiction. How can the self deceive the self, so therefore it doesn't exist? Well, we actually can at times consciously try to deceive ourselves, and I don't mean just putting our watch ahead 10 minutes and then hoping we forget it so that we actually arrive on time. But I mean things like actively trying to push thoughts out of our brain that are troubling us, or we don't want in there in consciousness for one reason or another. But psychologists have shown there's some interesting phenomena that go on there. There's often a rebound effect where you end up thinking about the damn thing even more often than you would if you hadn't attempted to suppress it. So here's one simple-minded view of self-deception. You're storing true information and false information about the same thing in your mind, but with a counterintuitive bias. You're sticking the true information in the unconscious, the false in the conscious. You would think that if you had to store false information, you'd put it somewhere down in the basement of your unconscious mind, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. And you would leave the true information in your conscious mind so as to benefit from whatever the benefits of consciousness are, and that's still poorly understood. But it has something to do with an ability to focus, you know, as we do with our eyes, and that's a clear sign someone's conscious, i.e. not passed out dead drunk, as the eyes are awake and show some reaction to reality. But exactly what the benefits are remains to be specified. So my theory is it's all organized according to an external observer. If you're watching my behavior now, you'll see manifestations of conscious activity and signs of conscious activity. But if you're trying to figure out my unconscious motivation or the unconscious structure to my thinking, that's going to be much harder for you to determine. Now, okay, so there are two broad examples I could give of my argument. First of all, let's assume now that I'm lying to you about something you care about, you're close enough, and better still, you know me. Then you can look for any of those correlates of conscious knowledge that you're practicing deception. For example, your voice tends to go up when you hit the key word in a lie, because whenever you tense your body, you're automatically going to push your voice up. The only way you can fight it is to sit there and kind of meditate yourself down and say, uh-oh, here comes the key voice. Now, calm your ass, Robert. You know, remember to let this thing expand outward. So that's a kind of inevitable consequence of tension associated with lying, and it's one of the most useful and predictive cues. Now, I saw an absurd example once when a woman was denying to me that she had a homosexual relationship with another woman, something I was not, in fact, accusing her of, and she said, "You think I'm there with Sherry?" And her voice shoots up 2 octaves on the key word, and I said to myself, well, I did have a theory, but now I've got some more evidence. You know? We tend not to meet the eye of someone we're lying to, and I used to think it was nervousness. You know, you're flicking your eyes back and forth. No, nervousness is a very poor predictor of self-deception. There's a couple of reasons for that, of deception, sorry, conscious deception. I'll come back to it. What really happens is that if you're making up a lie, it's cognitively demanding. You've got to create a false story. You have to make it plausible, and you have to give it in a convincing manner. It cannot contradict anything your listener knows already or is soon going to know, and you got to remember the damn thing. So it's cognitively demanding, and that'll cause pauses, and also it'll mean that it's harder, if you're inventing it, to look someone in the eye, because the back and forth feedback is itself cognitively demanding. So what you tend to do is look away from your victim, off into a blank part of space, construct your damn lie, and then look back at you and roll it forward. Okay, so that's another cue. Incidentally, this business about cognitive load of deception is one of the reasons why nervousness goes in the wrong direction. Let's take blinking. You blink your eyes more when you're nervous, but you blink your eyes less under cognitive load. That is, if I say add up a bunch of numbers, you'll blink less than if you're not being asked to do some cognitive task. So how does it work with deception? You blink less. The cognitive load overrides the nervousness. That's another reason why nervous is not a good cue. Okay? So, and while we're mentioning pauses, that's not a general rule, because there are lies that don't consist of creating nothing but simply denying something. You deny it. No, that's not true of me. I'm not that way. And in those you respond quicker than you would if it were a true statement you're making. It's like you want to get the reality out of the picture quick. So you deny it quick, okay? So you can look at these different kinds of lines of evidence. But if you practice self-deception, if you're unconscious of the deception you're practicing, if it's been organized for you in part by your unconscious mind, so there's relatively little cognitive load as well, all of those cues vanish. They're not available for you to detect deception. Well, let me give you another example that's in this same kind of ballpark. You're still deceiving others, but it's a category that's very general in our life and that I'll come back to shortly. And that is, we have a tendency to want to inflate ourselves in the eyes of others. So I'm smarter than I really am. I'm more useful to you than I really am. And trust me, this is a lie. I'm a nicer person than I really am. Better looking, and if you really want to see me at my best, take a look at me when I'm dancing. You know, so that's a full range of self-inflation here. And the notion here again is, if I believe the self-inflation, I'm going to be more apt to carry off the self-inflation. Okay? That's the argument. Now, there are linguistic biases that automatically come into play and that we're mostly unconscious of. If I do something that's beneficial for all of you, I'll take an active voice. I did this, I did that, and then benefits rain down on you from heaven. But if it's the other way around, I'll take a passive voice. I'm a victim of circumstances. Then, unfortunately, you suffer these costs. And this was nicely illustrated to me, it must have been 20 or 30 years ago now. Guy runs into a telephone pole in San Francisco, and as described in the police report, here's how he put it. The pole was approaching my car when I attempted to swerve out of the way, and it struck me, you know. Perfectly legitimate in terms of physics, but it switched the responsibility to the telephone pole. Here's another example. Let's pretend that Michael Shermer and I are in an in-group together, and let's make you be the out-group member. Then, if Michael does something nice for me, I'll say, he's a generous and helpful person. If you do the same identical thing, but you're out-group, I describe it specifically. You gave me a glass of water, okay? But if the situation's reversed and it's harmful, he bumps into me, then I say, Michael bumped into me. But the out-group member, I generalize. He's a clumsy and inconsiderate person. And we do this naturally, and psychologists have shown it. Just vary in-group and out-group, good and bad, and you'll get this shift. Okay, now let's go to this self-inflation business. If you ask high school seniors how many of them think they're in the top half of the class for leadership ability, 80% say they're in the top half. It ain't possible. But you cannot beat, in my opinion, you cannot beat academics for self-deception. So if you ask university professors in this country how many of them are in the top half of the profession, 94% of us claim we're in the top half of the profession, and I plead guilty. You know, I can be tied down to a bed in the back ward of LA General Hospital, and I still think I'm doing better than half my colleagues. And that's not just a comment on my colleagues. Right? So, but is this just our mouth flabbing in the Jamaican expression? Are we just flabbing our mouth? Jamaicans have a nice expression that we're bound to lie because our mouth is cut crossways. In other words, it's so easy to talk nonsense. Imagine our mouth was cut this way and we still had to move it up and down. You know, we would say 1/10 as much as we normally do and maybe cut out half the lies in the process. So anyway, the next study I think you'll enjoy because it demonstrates that something deeper is going on than just flabbing our mouths. And here maybe 70% of us say we're better looking than average. Well, do we really believe it, or are we just saying this for effect? So here's what happened. Epley, who is right here, and Whitchurch, who's a woman, these are the authors, they stripped her of her hair, thank you, and they have morphed her with increasing percentages of a good-looking woman's face, which is 15 women chosen out of a sample of 60 for good looks, and then you average. And averaging makes it even better looking than the average of the 15. Okay, fine. So this is a good-looking face. This is Whitchurch 20% better looking. This is where she's half and half. Now you can send her in the opposite direction by combining more and more of someone with craniofacial syndrome, which distorts their face, makes her ugly. So here she's 20% uglier, actual 20% better looking. Now I usually joke and say that Epley is not so good looking to begin with, but I got a letter from him just 2 days ago. Someone had sent him some video that's on the internet, and he complained to me, and he said, for example, that both his wife and his mother would disagree with me. You know, but anyway, it was a very pleasant letter. So we're going to skip that. Epley's a fine-looking gentleman, and they've gone and made himself 20% better looking and 20% uglier. Now here's the game they play, and you got to imagine they're playing it with you. So they've taken a photo of you, and they've morphed it to 20% better looking, 20% uglier. You're sitting in front of a computer screen, blingo. You see 12 faces, matched for age of sex of you, one of which is yours. Your only job is this. As soon as you see that face, and they emphasize, please, as soon as you see it, hit this button, and then point. This corrects for errors, okay? Now, the point is, they run these trials on you several times, and some of the time it's real you, some of the time it's 20% better looking you, some of the time it's 20% uglier you. So which do you see first? Well, you see better looking you first. It takes you 5% longer, these are seconds, to see real you, and 5% longer still to see ugly you. And then if they show you all 11 photos here, the real and the 5 ugly and the 5 good looking, and ask you which one you like the most, people on average choose 20% better looking. And if they ask you which one you think is you, even though you've got real you in front of you, people are between 10 and 20%, on average about 15%. And it's for this reason that they use 20% better and uglier in the earlier experiment. So it's bounded, and that makes some obvious sense in principle. 30% better looking might be implausible. 10% better looking, you're not gaining the full benefit, okay? So it's bounded at 20% better looking. And I don't need no damn social psychologist telling me this, because if I'm in a big city, I'll see it almost every week or so. I'll be walking down the road with a young and attractive woman, not up to nothing, you understand, just trying to make her like me enough to allow me to remain nearby, right? So I'm going through my shuck and jive, my little gambit with her. And then I happen to notice that on the other side of her is an old man, white hair, face starting to fall apart, and he's not even really walking, he's shambling, you know. And then, of course, I realize that's me reflected in the store windows behind her. So, self-deceived me sees real me as ugly me. Fine. One last comment, because this paper came out after my book did. It just came out a couple months ago, and it's taken the topic to the next level. So a whole group of people measured self-enhancement in 15 different societies, but they also correlated this with the degree of income inequality. And what they found was a very striking and strong correlation. The greater the income inequality, the greater the tendency to self-enhance. If you're in Sweden, where everybody's earning 10% more or 10% less, you know, it's very egalitarian distribution, they're very low in self-inflation. This country is very high in self-inflation. And as we all know, it's probably been getting worse over the last 30 years because God knows the distribution of wealth is getting more and more equal on a daily, if not minutely, basis right now. Okay, so that's a very interesting result. Now, let me give you another example where social psychologists have moved beyond the curse of their earlier work, which was it was all questionnaire answering behavior. You know, you take a questionnaire which shows that you've got a domineering personality, then you take a questionnaire that shows you're a racist, and then you correlate the two. You cannot build a science on correlations based on questionnaire behavior. This is the new kind of social psychology, and it's much, much more powerful. So here's another example. There are two ways you can write an E on your forehead. You can write an other-focused E, in which you all can read the E. And this pleasant-looking man is doing exactly that. Now, a somewhat nastier organism looking is writing E the way I would, so that in looking through it, I see an E, but it's backwards for you, okay? Now, it turns out that in general, people write an other-directed E, okay, an E that you all can read. However, it is sensitive to how powerful you feel. And psychologists have these little tricks where they can make you feel powerful or powerless. It lasts for a short period of time, but it lasts long enough for you to find some interesting effects. In this case, it was mostly just think of a time when you were really powerful, how did it feel, blah, blah, blah. And you get to pass out the M&Ms to this group of people. Okay, the powerless is the reverse thing, and you get to write down how many M&Ms you hope you'll get. All right. So there's your little manipulation. And here's the result. It has a striking effect on whether you write a self-focused E or not. As I mentioned to you, most people write an other focused E, so probably about 25%. But if you're made to feel low in power, then almost all of your E's are other focused, i.e. the self-focused are just 12% here. But if you're made to feel powerful, it jumps up here to about 33%. Now, there are a series of other things that correlate with this, which in some ways are more interesting. If you're made to feel powerful, you read facial expressions less well. These are facial expressions that'll be just put up there for a second. You got to say angry, sad, happy, whatever. You do it less well compared to the powerless. You remember facial expressions less well, and you have a harder time taking someone else's viewpoint in a simulated situation. So power is inducing a kind of blindness towards others. People that are powerless have got to pay attention. You know, they don't want to be victimized and so on. They've got to pay attention. So Well, I'll come to one conclusion in a second, but I do want to say you gotta love social scientists. Why in sweet Jesus' name, as they like to say, have they made this damn thing three-dimensional? You gotta run along here, then run down here. Here it's really hard. You gotta go run all the way down here, and then am I in the right place? Yes, run downhill. It's about 33%. So the general logic must be the less content, the bigger the presentation, okay? Now, we all tend to be overconfident, both the sexes. But in various domains, we know that overconfidence is more a male disease than a female disease. I would love to have people do it systematically across various traits. Maybe women will emphasize their good looks more than we will. I don't know, but for the things that have been measured, men are more overconfident. For example, very nice study was done of, I'll call it gambling behavior. It's really stock market trading or investing, done online by people in the 1990s. Nice big sample. Everybody's over trading because you pay a fee. And if you don't know what the hell's going on, and most don't, it's a random walk that you're betting against, and yet every time you bet, i.e. buy or sell, you are suffering a fee. So they've measured it, and women lose 1.5% of their money every year through overtrading, but men lose about 3% of their money. And there are other studies like this. Men are more overconfident. So a powerful man is apt to be both ignorant and overconfident. That's an unfortunate combination. And dangerous for the rest of us. Okay. And it reminds me of something that I've found in life, that self-deception often ends badly. You know, you start with it, it gives you some benefits, you float along, you're fooling some people, and it seems just fine, but then it can lead to an unfortunate collision with reality. Susie's left you. I thought she loved me. I thought she was just being nice about the fact that I was spending all my time working on my latest book. No, she was bored to tears and couldn't wait for the first chance to get the hell out of there, but I'm not noticing that. Okay, never mind about me and imaginary Susie. How soon does this whole thing start? Okay. Well, for self-deception, it's hard to say, but for deception, we're pretty sure that that starts by 6 months of age after birth. Well, we'll just get rid of this. We will make this enter. So this fellow's maybe 10 months old or a year old, but he's got his act down nicely. The first thing children do is they fake. So trust me. You're welcome. Trust me, he keeps that up all afternoon, but this is a skeptic talk. You know, we don't have that time. So we'll just watch it twice. Now here's another little boy that I love, and he's about, again, maybe 10 months of age, and what he's done is he's learned to use a facial expression out of context and in a novel way, and of course that's not deceptive per se, but it's closely allied to being deceptive. So you're going to hear his father in the background saying, "Give him the evil eyes, son, give him the evil look." Now you're going to see his real look. Watch. Like, what the hell's going on over there? That's the one he started with. Now we're going to go through this loop. It's the same thing, but you'll just get to see the fake one, the exaggerated one. And then followed by what I think was the original look, which is just, you know, what are you doing over there? So I love that little boy. But in fact, it's worse still. Now I'll talk to the women in the room. That baby inside you starts lying during the last 3 months the baby's inside you. First of all, it takes over control of your blood sugar level, increasing food for it. It increases your blood pressure, increasing food for it. It redistributes your blood around it. It takes your blood away from your extremities, your feet and your hands, and packs them right around it. Now, you could say this is a rational system from mom's standpoint. She says to herself, look, child knows his or her needs better than I do, so why don't I let the child determine these variables? It'll be more efficient and work better. Well, the problem with that is the child's going to want, by theory, more than the mother is selected to give. She's got other children, past, present, and future, that she's going to parcel her resources from. But what's the reason we really don't think it's the first alternative? The reason is because the child produces either the same hormones the mother does to control these variables at all other times, or close chemical mimics, but at 1,000 times the concentration that the mother does. So we believe that's a result of a coevolutionary struggle in which the offspring starts to dump in a few extra chemicals, the mother becomes inert. The offspring dumps in more, the mother becomes deaf. And this just escalates until we're up there at 1,000, and the offspring's still probably putting in 1,000, and 4, and the mother is starting to become inert to it. So behaviorally, it would be as if the baby is crying, "Mama, me hungry!" And mother's saying, "What do you say? Mama, me hungry." You say you're hungry? And only it's hormones and hormone receptors that are carrying the argument. All right. Now here's something extremely important. The smarter your child is, the more he or she lies. And here's the evidence. I've lost the scale here, but you'll trust me on this. You give your child a little cognitive test. This is done on 4-year-old children, and you center it around 100. And if you've got a bright child lies 100% of the time in the situation I'm about to describe. If you've got a slow child, 65% of the time. Now, what's the experiment? It's a classic invented by a good friend of mine, Michael Lewis, head of the Institute of Child Development at UMD&J. Anyway, child's sitting here in a chair. There's a box behind the child. The experimenter comes in and sticks something in the box. Child can hear the, no. Then the experimenter says, listen, I'm leaving the room for a couple of minutes. Do not peek. Do not peek. And then they go out of the room and watch the child through a one-way glass window. And, of course, most of the children peek. So then they come back and they say, did you peek? And most of the children lie. But the point is, the smarter they are, the more they're likely to lie. Indeed, he's done very careful work. If you do a weighted measure of 23 perinatal factors that correlate with health, these are very minor factors right at the time of birth you can measure, which correlate positively or negatively with health, then the healthier your child is, the more the child will end up lying in this situation. So we might easily imagine and wish it were otherwise. We might think, well, we're brighter than average, and we're bright enough so we can see through our own self-deception and minimize it and so on, but I don't believe it. I think that deception is positively related to intelligence, and self-deception may be as well, since it's being entrained by deception. So, for example, if you look at the same kind of thing in monkeys and apes, only here you're using the size of the neocortex. You can use the size of the whole brain, corrected for body size, but the correlation is slightly tighter if you just use the neocortex. And these scientists went out there and spent I don't know how much time getting examples of tactical deception in published works from the wild. And then they wrote a paper, and then they sent it out and solicited unpublished examples. And they got a huge sample, and they corrected it for group size, how often the species is studied, this, that, and the third thing. And what they have is this very strong relationship. The bigger the neocortex, the more often these monkeys are seen lying in nature. This is the axis here will look strange to you. because it's set up to do a so-called taxonomic contrast case. And what that allows you to assert is that this is true throughout all monkeys and apes. It could be it was only true of apes, but the effect was large enough that on average it was true. No, this is true throughout whatever section of monkeys and apes you're looking at. Okay. Let me give you one more for amusement's sake. This work was done down in Georgia on A1 heterosexual men, college men really. And what's an A1 heterosexual man? He's never had a homosexual experience, nor a homosexual fantasy or thought, or so he says. Okay? Now, you give him a little scale that measures homophobia. That's literally fear of homosexuals, but it's really discomfort, anger, and that kind of thing. It's much more hostility than fear, the actual measure they use, homophobia scale. So now you divide your men into those that are relaxed about homosexual men and those that are hyper upset. Now comes the fun part. You tie a plethysmograph around the base of each man's wood, as we would say in Jamaica. And plethysmograph measures small changes in circumference very precisely. All right. Now comes the fun part. We show them dirty movies, and first of all, we show a man and a woman making love for 6 minutes, pornographic movie. The wood takes off admirably. It grows throughout the time. It's continuing to grow. For all we know, if he still has room left in his erection, it'll grow in the 7th minute as well. But in any case, right up through 6. Now, there's no difference between the two categories of men. Statistically, they're indistinguishable, so I won't tell you which is which. Now they're looking at two women making love, and things start off well, but then they taper off, and they do not reach the same level of arousal as seeing a man and a woman. Okay? Again, these two are statistically identical. Now I think you may be imagining what's going on down here, and I don't know whether everybody can see it. Whoops. I don't know how much I'll destroy if I make sure you see it, but anyway, here are your non-homophobic men. They show a slight and statistically insignificant increase in tumescence. For all you know, they're not being aroused at all. Here's your homophobic men. Dick size starting to increase, starting to take off here, continuing to rise throughout. Hell, he's 2/3 of the way up to watching two lesbians. And he's never had a homosexual thought, fantasy, or anything like it. Now, if you ask these men to tell how big they think they got and how aroused they were, all five, these two, and this one, are congruent with what the plethysmograph is showing. This is the only exception. He denies tumescence, even though he's got a little gizmo down there measuring it. He denies arousal, and yet he's showing it. Now, you know, in the U.S., this is a monthly occurrence in the U.S. A preacher, a politician who's taken a strong public stance against homosexuals gets outed for his secret homosexual life. So it appears to be a simple case of denial. You can toss in the term reaction formation, a Freudian term that has to do with denying something that you find distasteful about yourself. You project it onto someone else, and then you attack it in the other person, presumably functioning partly as camouflage for something you don't want to reveal about yourself. Okay, now I want to become time conscious. I know you spent 15 minutes talking about whales and trilobites, and then there was your overly long introduction. So how much time do I have left of my allotted 45 minutes?
You're good. Keep going.
Keep going?
Yeah.
10 or 15 max?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, one of the joys of writing this book was learning a whole new area that I didn't know before, and I had to learn it. And if you're serious about your work, you go learn what you need to know to do the work you're trying to do. And that was self-deception has a whole series of immunological correlates. And if you do not know the immunological side of the story, you're missing out on a good piece of it. Let me mention, music is good down here at the bottom. You can play people music from an elevator, and they get a 20% boost in a key immune parameter. Jazz, it's only a 7% boost. No sound, they're neutral, and if it's noise, it's about an 18% drop. Rats, you can play them cacophony at midnight, and then in the morning they either get to listen to Brahms or they don't. And you inject them, you know, rats, you can do any damn thing to them you want, so they inject them with 500 cancer cells. And sure enough, if they're allowed to listen to Brahms, their immune system's stronger and they hold off the cancer longer. Positive affect is good, as we've just shown. Meditation can improve immune function, and that's, again, getting you into a more positive state and so on. But here's the ones I want to talk about. Suppressing truth is costly and sharing trauma is beneficial. So homosexual men have been studied in some depth in the last 10 or 20 years because of HIV. So as you know, you can be in the closet. If you're really in the closet, one or two of your heterosexual friends know that you're homosexual, and that's about it. Then it ranges, you know, a few more know it and your parents know it, or a few more your parents and your workmates, and then all your friends, and then whoop-de-doo, everybody knows you're homosexual even if they don't know you, because you're out there. So the question is, what's better for your immune system? And the answer is unambiguous. If you divide them into simply mostly in the closet or mostly out, although it's a graded phenomenon, it goes down with increasing or goes up with increasing degrees of being out of the closet. But in any case, let's take HIV negative men. They suffer more cancer and more bronchitis, sort of on the opposite ends of dangerousness to you, if they're in the closet. Okay, it's hard on you. You're living a lie, and it takes a cost out of you. Okay? Now, if you're HIV positive, you transit into AIDS quicker and you die 20% quicker. Now, that was the first studies I came across, and I didn't completely like them because although they corrected for everything they could think of, socioeconomic class, ethnicity, blah, 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 they did not correct for frequency of unprotected sex. And from the standpoint of progressing into AIDS, if I've got one strain of HIV in me, but someone kindly donates a second strain to me, then the two strains will fight it out, and that'll tend to increase viral load, and I'll tend to transit into AIDS quicker. But then there were two studies, the most recent ones, that corrected for exactly that. And I don't know what your prediction is, but mine is that if you were in the closet, you'd be more likely to practice unprotected sex. If I'm out of the closet, I got 3 condoms on me and 1 in my boot in case there's an orgy, right? Now, but if I'm in the closet, I'm going out with my heterosexual friends, the Shermers and the Burnhams, and I'm not planning anything homosexual, but after 4 drinks, on the way home, my car turns left instead of right, and I ain't got no damn condom, all right? Sure enough, exactly that was shown, but it was just marginally significant, just under 0.05. And when you corrected the general correlation was very strong, whether you added this element of unprotected sex or not. Okay? So, by the way, how many of you have heard of the glass closet? I didn't think so. This is a New Jersey invention, so far as I know. And I'm trying to spread this little New Jersey meme, you know. So a glass closet is a homosexual man who acts heterosexual because he thinks his heterosexual friends won't like him if they know. In fact, all of them know. So he's in a glass closet. He thinks he's in a closet, but everybody else can see inside. Well, no one has done the immunology of people in a glass closet yet. Sharing trauma is beneficial is very, very important work by Jamie Pennebaker at the University of Texas. If we're brought into the lab, we have to say what's the most traumatic event. Half of us write about it. 3 days running for 20 minutes in a private journal. The others just write about what we were doing that day. Those that writing about it, they feel worse because they're dwelling on something negative, but their immune system starts improving immediately. 3 months later, their immune system is elevated, and now their mood has gone up too. Mood is following immune system, not the other way around. Okay, fine. So let's, I think I'll just kill the slides here and just discuss briefly. Let me see how much time Michael gave me. Okay. I got 10 minutes max. Shut me up, you know, slap me like that if you need to, and I'll shut up. So, what's that?
You have all the time you want, I have a feeling.
Okay, fine. Okay, so there's a couple of topics I just wanted to tell you about, but here's a quote from Groucho that I just came across, which is priceless, and if I'd known it, it would be in my book. The secret of life is honesty and fair dealing. If you can fake that, you have it made. Anyway. Now, there's a whole chapter on airplane crashes. Some people, you know, they fly from Chicago to Boston. They say, I love the chapter. Other people say, I think I'll read that one when I'm on the ground, you know. So it's deceit and self-deception contributing to airplane and space disasters. And I happened to write a paper on a famous crash, the one that took off from National Airport in D.C. in 1981 in a blinding snowstorm and never reached further than the Potomac River. And they brought 4 people out alive out of the back of it. A good friend of mine from Harvard, Bob Silberglied, died on the flight. So anyway, I kept up with the literature. I was a consultant with the Army about cockpit conversations and so on. So I'll give you just one fact. Okay. Pilots fly the airplane half the time. Co-pilots fly it the other half the time. This is just statistically what is true. Now, you understand that when the co-pilot is flying, ultimately the pilot is still in charge, but nevertheless, the co-pilot's doing the flying. 80% of accidents occur when the pilot is flying. Again, it's a counterintuitive fact. Ain't he the pilot? Doesn't he have more experience? Isn't he older? Isn't he putatively a better flyer? All of that's true. But more accidents occur when he's flying, and careful work suggests that the reason for this has to do with the dominant structure in the cockpit, where the co-pilot will be too timid in certain situations to tell the pilot that he's effing up, whereas the pilot is not going to be similarly inhibited. One of the lines of evidence is that the worst mismatch comes when the pilot and the co-pilot are flying for the first time. If Michael is co-pilot and I'm pilot, forgive me for that, Michael, then if we've been flying a number of times, well, you know, we have a relationship, and you say, Bob, I love you, and so on, but you're flying straight into a mountain, you know. Veer to the left. But if you're really inhibited, and this happened with Korea Airlines, they have a very hierarchical society, and right in the cockpit, as symbolized by the fact that a Korean air pilot once just backhanded the co-pilot for making some remark that he didn't like. So anyway, and they had a whole history of crashes until they reformed that whole culture in the cockpit, you know, and tried to give the subordinate person more of the power. Now, I don't know. I mean, there's a whole chapter on self-deception in war, and self-deception makes an unusually large contribution to disastrous wars especially. And one that is extremely well studied is the U.S. war on Iraq 2003. Some people say, oh, it shouldn't be in your book. It's an op-ed piece for the New York Slimes and so forth and so on. And I say it's recent, it's highly pertinent, and we know an awful lot about what went on. It's public record now, you know. So anyway, there were 3 key contributors to it. First of all, psychologists have long known that there's a difference in our psychology depending on whether we're in the deliberative phase of a decision or the instrumental. So let's say I'm trying to decide whether to marry Susie or Bobby. So in that deliberative phase, I'm weighing their positive, negative points more or less rationally. But as soon as I've decided on Susie, I don't want to hear about Bobby, and I don't want to hear about the downside to Susie. Now I'm in the instrumental phase where I'm carrying it out, okay? Well, there was no deliberative phase for the Iraq War. It lasted, what, a half a day? You know, by the evening of 9/11, they're already saying, bring us evidence of Saddam's involvement. So it was all in the instrumental phase in which people don't want to hear about the downside. It was worse because the chief problem in terms of deception, self-deception, was not could you knock over Saddam Hussein? That was trivially obvious. With the greatest military power on earth, we could knock him over in no time. The problem was selling a lousy product to this country and the rest of the world. And when you're selling a lousy product, you don't want to hear about the downside. So we believe that's the major reason why they did no planning whatsoever. Well, that's not quite true. I'll come to that in a second. No planning whatsoever on what to do on day 2 in Baghdad. When we went to war against Japan and Germany, we set up a college down there, University of Virginia, just to study how the occupation of Germany and Japan ought to proceed. I mean, there's 3 years of a whole section of a university devoted to studying exactly that. Now, actually, the Bush administration set up working groups, and they produced 17 volumes of recommendations, some of which were excellent, but they walled themselves off from them. They refused to have any contact between the decision makers and these groups. So why they went through this exercise is a little bit mystifying, you know, but they did, and they remained ignorant. Now, there are 2 little facts I want to mention about it that I think will amuse you. One is that the same Jamie Pennebaker, who did the very good work on sharing trauma, he then invented a computer program to analyze people's writing to see what's the key in the writing. And it turns out that people that use more insight words and vary between I and they, i.e. take different vantage points, they're more apt to show an immune improvement in writing about trauma. But he also has worked out some of the linguistic features of lying. And so someone did a beautiful analysis of top administration spokespeople talking either about the, as we know, non-existent WMDs, or about the non-existent connection between Saddam and bin Laden. And they compared those kinds of statements linguistically with statements made by the same people during the same period of time, but on non-Iraq related issues. And so you had evidence of, linguistic evidence of deception. First of all, the word I plummeted sharply, and that's a general feature. If you're lying, you don't emphasize I. You distance yourself from the lie, and you use other kinds of terms, and you make a third person if you can, but you reduce I. You also reduce qualifiers. So if I'm telling a story, I say, you know, I walked to my office at Caltech. But if it's a truthful statement, I might have a qualifier. I might say, although it was raining that day, I nevertheless walked there. But you see, when you're telling a lie, you don't add complexity. That's stuff you got to remember. That's stuff that you got to invent, and that's stuff that could even be contradicted. So the qualifiers disappeared from these people's statements. There were more negative words, and I'll skip why that's connected with deception. The only linguistic feature that didn't fit it was there were fewer action words in their mendacious statements. And that may be because we were pretending that action was the furthest thing from our mind. Bush said, you know, I go to war with Saddam, that's the very last thing I want to do. We're exhausting all the possibilities. BS. Okay. Now, the second thing I want to tell you is that the power of lies at the group level can be quite astonishing. 6 months after this disastrous adventure, it was quite clear there were no weapons of mass destruction. As Hans Blix put it at one point, how could there be certainty there were weapons of mass destruction and complete ignorance about where any of them were located, which was the U.S. position. In any case, so they do a survey. More than most Democrats had heard that there were no WMDs and believed there were none. More than half of Republicans, the war party we'll call them in this situation, either had not heard of the evidence or disbelieved it. So all you got to do is state a lie for your own group to get everybody aboard. It doesn't require much more than that. So anyway, let me leave time for questions and so on, and just say that this is a topic that goes from our most intimate details of our life, our most intimate relations with a lover, let's say a parent, our own children, our parents, and so on, even our conversations with ourselves. And it goes right on up there to, we pass through plane crashes up to national disasters, false historical narratives, lies we tell ourselves about our own country's past and so on, serving to justify future misbehavior, etc. So this is something that touches us on every facet of our life, and goddamn, if you read the newspapers, there's so much deceit and self-deception pouring out of this country, it would take you a full day's work to just deconstruct it. And sometimes I'll turn on Stewart and Colbert in the evening. I'll say, God damn, they're just deconstructing all the lies. And it's hilarious, but that's the function they're performing. And so I've tried to present in my book as much biology as I can. That's what I am. There's no genetics. There's some neurophysiology of interest. Immunology is very important. Evolutionary logic is important. But all of us can contribute on this subject. First of all, no matter what our field is, you could be in English studies and study Shakespeare or other writers. There's plenty of examples of deceit and self-deception there. Autobiographies, artwork, or no academic work at all, because we're all doing it and we're all victimized by it. So it's something we can study at a distance, but we can also contribute to if we wish. I thank you.
Shtick today. That's nice.
You didn't know what?
Stand-up shtick today. I didn't know we were going to get some. The comedy club is right.
Okay. I wouldn't. I'm surprised you're surprised. Is all I got to say.
Evidence stuff. You know, when ufologists, when you ask ufologists where are the spacecraft, where's the bodies, they say, well, they're hidden. And it's, how do you know they're hidden? Because we can't find them. And that's the same argument that the weapons of mass destruction. How do we know they have them? Because we can't find them.
There's somebody.
Yep,
go ahead.
Simple question. What can we do about it? And by that I mean your first slide, you know, better fooling yourself, better fool others, almost sounds like an unofficial motto of the public.
Oh, okay. Well, so anyway, to answer the question you posed, I try, and it's pathetic, but I try in the last chapter fighting our own self-deception. But it's mostly examples from my own life, okay? Now, what I find is that life is like riding on a train facing backwards. You see events after they've happened. I can give you chapter and verse on my self-deceptions, but they're seen in retrospect. Does that knowledge help me to not do the same damn mistake the following day? Often not. I'll give you one example that involves a certain amount of it. Someone, Michael Shermer, writes me an unpleasant letter and arouses the spiteful side of me. And I work out a quick and nasty letter. Now, there's a certain voice in me that speaks up and says, Robert, you've done this 634 times, and every time after you've sent it, you've regretted it, either immediately or when you get back an even nastier thing from him, you know. So don't do it. And then the first voice comes back stronger and says, no, this time it's going to work. And there goes 615, you know. So, you know, there's a few things I've learned in there. So what the hell is a good example? I know one, well, wait a second, let's save that one. Okay. I scrutinize myself very carefully when I'm screwing up in ongoing life, okay? So I smashed a glass of wine while allegedly trying to wash the dishes, and I was thinking of saying something, calling a woman and saying something to her that she did not need to hear, nor did she wish to hear. So as soon as I screwed up in ongoing life, I always think, what were you thinking right then? And I usually cancel it. You know, I say it's probably as stupid in that relationship as breaking the glass is here. I once tore half of my lower lip off while calling someone a mofo, and I thought to myself, mofo indeed, he's 700 miles away and he's still able to take half my lip off, you know? So the point is to watch it, and it's not always anger. I was surprised to learn that my door handle on my Toyota is made out of plastic, but I proved it when I pulled half of it off. And that was in a moment of excitement, where I wanted to send an email to someone quickly who could do something beneficial to me, but I immediately meditated, no, you're sending it too quickly and it's too positive. So I take any, so that's one thing I use, okay? There are other things where I will reverse it. For example, the rational way to search for objects is to look at the most likely place first and go down the line. But maybe because of harsh retribution when I was young from my father, if I failed to find whatever the hell he sent me off to find, and I didn't spend my time studying his wardrobe or where he hid it, you know. But anyway, I would start in the reverse order, the least likely place. And that had the psychological pseudo-benefit that each successive move was more hopeful. Because I just tried out something that was hopeless. It was only the very last one that was scary, because if it wasn't there, I was stone out of luck. So now I will start doing that, but I will say, no, you're doing that, and it makes no sense. And I will reverse it and try to search for things in a logical order. And I'm coming to you. I'll just give you, and you all, I'll give you just one last example now. This works better with young people, trust me. Not that some of you all aren't young, but anyway. I just recently came to, you know, if I had only learned this 35 years ago when it actually mattered, it would be useful. But here's the slogan: better to go to bed lonely than wake up guilty. I will say that one more time. It is better to go to bed lonely than wake up guilty. And, you know, formulating it as a simple rule has helped me to start behaving that way with benefits. There was someone here with a question. Yes?
Is there a best way to get another person to see the truth when they're being self-deceptive?
That's a good question, and I don't have a good answer at all for that. That's another twist on it. What would you do about trying to reduce someone else's self-deception? And I can imagine that might be particularly pertinent if it's someone you're, you know, in a relationship of one form or another. It could be someone close to you and you just can't stand the self-deception that they push forward in certain situations. Could be a boss or someone else. But I don't have any good answer. I don't have any answer to it at all. It's a good question. I wish it had occurred to me. All right, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a relationship between self-deceit and acting, like a part of the brain that kind of works with it and kind of becomes sophisticated at it, maybe.
I don't know. The relationship with acting, as you start talking about it, I don't know. I mean, actors will, I've heard descriptions from actors of how they try to get into the feel of the person, and so then they can actually act naturally how that person is. But I'm not sure that's self-deception as much as identification or whatnot. So I would, you know, it'd be tricky. Yes, sir. You.
The people who did the research on the linguistic indicators of lying during the Iraq War that you mentioned.
Yeah.
You have the names of those people?
Can they what?
Do you have their names, the names of the researchers?
Yes, I said their name, Jamie Pennebaker. And there's one excellent book which I usually say, if you buy only one other book besides my own, buy The Secret Life of Pronouns. Because what he discovered was that it was the smallest words that were the most revealing, including pronouns, but then including qualifiers like although and so forth and so on. It's a beautiful book. Yes?
does overconfidence and ignorance create the powerful individual? And if that would be the case, wouldn't that be a net positive for an individual as opposed to a group? So if I become powerful because I have self-deceit, doesn't that put me in a better position within the group to be able to have?
Well, yes, if that's the way the causality is going, which was not, the data I was presenting, the causality were going the other direction, but there's no reason why you couldn't hypothesize it like you do. And yes, that would be a case where an individual could benefit, but the rest of the group could suffer from it. And indeed, it's a feature of self-deception at the global level that the people that cause disasters rarely suffer any adverse consequences. I mean, is Henry Kissinger still alive, or is he finally dead? No, I think he's still alive, you know. And they trot him in and talk to him every now and again as an elder statesman, and he's a goddamn war criminal. And he, you know, Chile, Argentina, all these kind of places that he effed up. His behavior during the Vietnam War. Has he suffered any ill effects? I haven't noticed them. The best and the brightest for the Vietnam War, any ill effects? Who knows? Look at the Bushites. I won't even mention any of their odious names, but you know, it's kind of sad that there's no direct feedback. You know, now people get mad at me. Steve Pinker says, "Oh, so you want to go in and shoot them all, do you?" Well, in fact, yes, but that, by the way, excuse me, I'll come to you. But it amuses me, you know, that if you suggest the mildest kinds of reform of our tax system back in the directions where it's always been, i.e. a little bit more a contribution from those with lots of wealth, they say, class warfare, class warfare. What the hell are you talking about? Class warfare is when the peasants with their pitchforks go to the king's home. That's class warfare.
Let's get the pitchforks.
I'm with you, brother. If Skeptic will finally take a stance on something, and issues pitchforks along with your magazine, I don't know. Maybe we could. I like. Here we have a woman. There are not many, so come to me, Nancy. What do you want to say? Talk to me.
I don't want to come to you, and I'm self-deceptive, but.
Well, okay. Excuse the metaphor. Sit where you are and talk to me.
My question is that there's been a lot of research on online dating networks in terms of deception and how people present themselves. And they found,
online dating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they found exactly what you found in terms of the people involved in the Iraq War, that they have shorter narratives and they use less personal pronouns, but also more negative words.
Yes.
You mentioned that, but you didn't describe why that might be. I'm curious as to why that might be.
Well, Nancy, as usual, you got your finger on a vulnerable spot here. People have argued that the negativity comes because they're guilty about it or fearful of the response. I doubt it myself, and I think negative may sometimes be that part of constructing the lie is negating some other facts, but it has not been worked out in any convincing logical form to me. You know, I'd certainly welcome you or anybody else trying to figure it out. It's a correlation that seems robust, but the explanations about, well, you're actually guilty about the lying, so the negativity shows up in this other form, I don't believe it. And it's not very satisfying, you know. But I tend to think of it as having to do with negating reality while you create reality. You know, denial and projection are logically linked. If you deny a fact or a piece of reality, in principle, you've got a piece of reality that's empty that you got to construct something to fill it, you know. So I don't know. The simple answer is I don't know. Yes, sir.
I want to ask you a question about pets. I think our cat deceives us.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to share the evidence, or is this a private observation?
Well, I don't know. She'll dash around and act like she is afraid of me. Mm-hmm. But I really think she wants to play.
Probably does, and it probably is a signal inviting play. And she's wondering, what the hell do I have to do to this dense head to get him to play, you know? But I'll give you an example of a pet acting deceptively that a biologist friend of mine pointed out to me in Jamaica. So he was living up in sort of halfway up a mountain and had an open tropical home where you're trying to catch the breeze through it, you know. So we're sitting there chatting, and suddenly the dog comes running through it at an incredible rate, like it's on the way to a fire or something. So he said, watch. He said, that dog's coming back. So sure enough, dog runs around the house, dog comes running through now, but now it's not nearly as fast. What it is doing, according to him, is it's habituating him to the dog's presence in the house, because he don't want the dog in the house. So the third time, the dog is coming through so slowly, and then he just sort of, what the hell, lies down. So the first part of this, you know, a couple of times through at a good rate and then slowing down is to habituate this guy into tolerating him, something like that. You had a question, sir.
In your chapter on religion, you appropriately describe religion as a very well-developed system of self-deception. But then in the last chapter on fighting self-deception, you say that you like to recite the Lord's Prayer.
Yes.
Whereas prayer would seem like an act of self-deception.
Well, no, I beg to differ. It depends on the kind of prayer, and I do not characterize in the religion section religion as only a well-developed system of self-deception. I mean, there are two extreme views. There's the Dawkins meme view, that it's a viral meme that just spread even though it has negative consequences all over the place. But it's spread everywhere in the globe. It has to have positive effects in terms of reproductive success, and then you have to separate actual belief statements and their truth value with just the value of a religious experience or community. And there's evidence that it's beneficial for health, and there's evidence that it can increase within group cooperation, however, with the double face that it increases between group hostility. Nothing like religious madness to get you slaughtering, you know, your near neighbors and so on. So I actually think it's complicated, but let me give you an example. There is, what do they call it? Intercessory prayer. So I was raised as a Presbyterian, and every now and then I'll go back, and it's because I'm hunting women, to tell you the truth. And it's a tough hustle. It's a tough hustle to get a church woman aboard, you know. So I don't go often. But anyway, the minister comes down the aisle at a certain point and solicits all these wishes. And then he goes back up there and he says, Sarah's mother is about to undergo operation for cancer, so we all pray for her. And someone else is in dire straits, and we all pray. That's intercessory prayer. Well, I mean, on the face of it, it's extremely unlikely. If you could put it in religious terms, would God build a universe with all of these interlocking laws and then violate them on a minute-to-minute basis on the basis of how much people are begging? I mean, it's insane. But they put it to a test. The dear old Templeton Foundation, trying to integrate religion and science, pays $2 to $3 million. They ran this at 6 different places, including Mass General, with the Harvard. So, you know, A1 institutions participating. So anyway, they got a bunch of us that are just about to have an operation, and everybody, and then half of them are being prayed for, and half of them aren't. And then you've got measures of their recuperation during the month. No effect whatsoever. However, there was one sub-finding that was amusing, and that is half the people, they told them you're being prayed for, and the other half, they didn't. And the people that were told they were being prayed for got worse. On all 20 measures. They had 20 different measures. Every single one they're worth. That's highly significant right there alone. Now, it may be that you're lying there in bed and they come in and they say, Robert, we're all praying for you. You think, Jesus Christ, this is worse than I imagined, you know. Also, if I'm lying in bed, this is my imagination, I'd rather they came in and said, don't worry about your dog. We're feeding the dog. As for your apartment, we've sent in a crew to clean it up. So, everything, we're building back your life. We're doing positive things for you. But if they come in and tell you something which on logical and empirical grounds is impossible, and that's what they're doing for you, and it may suggest dire straits. In any case, entirely negative. Now, in the praying thing, I don't, there's a particular way of saying the Lord's Prayer that a man taught me on an airplane, a so-called religious, and he was way the hell out there. He's just reading books about God, and very deep, And he says, do you pray? And I said, of course I pray. What do you pray? I say, I just say the Lord's Prayer. So he asked me to say it the way I did it. That was Presbyterian marching song. Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It basically, you're asserting things to God, So he's saying, no. It's all humbleness and submission. Thy will be done, etc. So that's what I talk about in that session. But it's a form of meditation, and I don't believe there's some switchboard where someone's listening and then it's going into God and all that kind of nonsense. I think of it as a form of meditation, and what I think about whether God exists and in what form, I think those questions are way beyond our capacity to solve in any kind of deep way, There's an enormous amount of garbage produced by religion. Richard Dawkins had a nice phrase the other day. He said, everybody's against all but one religion. Their own. They're against all the others. So he says, why not go whole hog and just be against all of them? Toss yours in the fire too. Yes, sir.
If you were to survey all the history of the species, has self-deception been constant? Is it on the rise, or is it descent?
Well, it's easy enough to answer that because there's no evidence on it whatsoever. So, but first of all, if you're talking about other species, we're just now getting some good studies in on monkeys that almost close the entire circle and demonstrate self-deception. And the two cases are in my book, chapters 1 and chapter 3. I'm sure that self-deception started well before language, because let's just deal with male-male interactions. You and I have been in fights, so to speak, or potentially aggressive situations for at least a couple 100 million years. And one relevant feature in the interaction is what is my view of your sense of yourself? How confident are you? You know yourself. You spent your whole life with you. I'm just running into you with my antlers ready, and there's a group of females over here, and I got to decide whether to go for it or not. So I pay I pay attention to my sense of your own sense of your confidence or whatnot. So that's an internal variable that is then easy to expand, Showing you're bigger than you are is harder to do than showing you're more confident than you really are. And likewise in courtship. To put it in a negative way, I think many of us would agree few things are as good a romantic or sexual turnoff as someone of the opposite sex that has a low self-image. It's almost like, well, she's been living with herself for 28 years. This is back when I'm 35, by the way, which is roughly my self-image right now. So, she's known herself for 28 years. I've only known herself for 2 weeks. She thinks she's not worth much. She must know something I don't know. It's a turn-up. So also in courtship situations, it seems to me there was selection for to be more confident than you really are, to hide certain things. So I think it's definitely pre-linguistic. But to make comparative statements about whether it's increasing or decreasing, this and that, it increased greatly with language, for sure. Because language, linguists who are used to be fond of saying it allows us to make true statements about events distant in space and time. Yeah, it also allows us to make false statements about things that are distant in space and time, and those are harder to contradict. If I tell you this man has a pink shirt on, you can directly contradict it. But if I tell you, this or that is going on in New Jersey, are you going to be able to or not? So I think it definitely increased in our own lineage with language. You know, what its resting place is going to be, who knows? You know, what its final equilibrium is going to be. Yes?
So you mentioned at the beginning of your talk that philosophers are kind of deceived about self-deception, and I was wondering how you would go about testing self-deception in academic contexts. Because you mentioned also that the smarter you are, or at least in children, the smarter they are, the more likely they are to lie. But scholarly conventions about how you present yourself make me think that it would be difficult to use the same kind of Pennebaker linguistic inquiry word count tools to get at that type of deception. Any suggestions on how we can prove that philosophers are deceiving themselves about certain things?
Well, the 13th chapter, the second to last, is on the social sciences. And I do argue that the more social a discipline, the more its development has been retarded by forces of self-deception. There's very little self-deception in physics. Of course, everybody's claiming that their work is more important than the next business work. There's the usual jockeying for attention, and then they sell us a Bill of Rights that they're, you know, are going to produce a theory of everything. Nonsense like that every now and again. But other than that, you don't gain much by misrepresenting the mu meson or those kind of things. But when you get closer and closer to humans, there are more and more forces that are at work on you psychologically and so on to misrepresent things. Philosophers amuse me, but I've not done any kind of study of them, because they always claim that they're going to clarify linguistically what's going on, and after I read the shit, I'm completely confused. So I believe their actual function is to obfuscate, but I haven't worked that out. But, I mean, is economics a science? No, period. Why? It walks like one and quacks like one. It gives itself a Nobel Prize, and it has an extravagant mathematical edifice built up. It doesn't do one of the most elementary things a science does, which is to try to ground itself on pre-existing knowledge. Physics sits on mathematics for a very good reason. Chemistry sits on physics, again for very good reasons. Biology sits on chemistry. And it's not always, there are famous situations in which the chemist discovered something that forced the physicist to change their theory. But the point is, everybody's trying to be consistent with one set of knowledge, and the firmer and more reliable your foundations, the better for you. Then we reach the social so-called sciences, and they have a long history of saying, huck biology, we're just going to make this stuff out of whole cloth, you know? If we're Freud, we're going to snort up some cocaine and talk about anal, oral, and Oedipal. And I mean, and he got several generations of people believing that the women in this audience are running around wishing they had a dick. Not access to one, but actually had one, you know? And we're deathly afraid that our father's going to cut off our balls. All kinds of just ganz Quatsch, as the Germans would say. So the economists, you know, they have this... I don't know what to do about that, so we'll put it back away. The economists play this shell game where we're maximizing something called utility, and if you say to them, what's utility? They say, well, whatever you want to maximize. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's food over money, sometimes sex trumps the other two, okay? So you need preference functions that'll tell you when this variable takes priority over that. Now that's hopeless to do for a single organism. If we want to work out your preference functions, Jesus Christ, we got to know what time of day it is, what your other options are, how much you've eaten, and all that kind of stuff. It's hopeless. Now, and they lack a theory because utility is empty. It has no content. So evolutionary biology, that happens to be one thing it claims to have done. It claims to say what all organisms are trying to do or have been selected to attempt to do. And that's maximize their inclusive fitness, i.e. the spread of the genes in the individual. Now, if you had that as a theory for utility, then maybe we wouldn't be subject to this kind of nonsense that comes out of economics, where Greenspan can say in the early 2000s, well, market forces will naturally constrain the excesses of deception or greed or something. In no other creature is that true. I can give you examples of creatures where a whole deceptive morph has evolved that's obligate, that costs the species, let's say, 15% of its parental investment every damn generation, serving no useful function that anybody can figure out. It's just deception that's crept in and gotten a... So, and they often easily imagine that individual utility is congruent with group utility. And again, biology we've known for a long time, that's nonsense. So anyway, don't get me started.
Thank
you. Thank you. Thank you.